guess who is smelling his own farts again?
At the Day for Freedom, I was interviewed by The Guardian, and this guy from The Guardian, I can't remember exactly what he said, but basically, they quote me by saying, Carl Benjamin, whose alias is Sargon of Akkad, said the protest was against totalitarianism, identity politics, and Islamism, which is really the same thing. And James Allsup was like, whoa, does anyone actually believe this? And it's like, do you think you can have identity politics without totalitarianism?
Well, no, I don't think so. I think that in order for you to be the dominant collective, it requires it.
In order to be the dominant collective, you require totalitarianism. Why don't we go back to literally any European country 500 years ago and find out if that's true? These people are already acting with the assumption that the way things are now are the way things always have to be. It's not requiring any totalitarianism in Kenya to make sure that the Kenyans are the majority, the dominant collective of Kenya.
Exactly. I mean, the point I made in the speech when I was there is that, and this was actually something that an observation that was in a book by a postmodernist that I was reading, that I was genuinely surprised. It was such a salient observation. Identity politics erases the distinction between the private and the public. So, and literally, this is what social justice warriors will say all the time. The personal is political. It's like, okay, well, that means everything is political. Everything down to your bloody toothbrush management.
Yeah, and it requires totalitarianism in order for it to function.
And so instead of actually criticizing the group that James Allsup belongs to, he instead reaches to the social justice warriors, as he always does. There is safe bet. He says that if the personal is political, then literally everything is political. But even this isn't true. You can make personal aspects of your life political without making the entirety of your personal life political. Just because I know I'm a white person and I'm looking out for what's in my interest, it doesn't mean the government gets to mandate what my fucking toothbrush collection looks like.
Exactly. I mean, it is literally the totality of your life that becomes political, because there is no time when you will not be a straight white man or, whatever identity category that you're involved in.
And here it is. Here is where the dishonesty lies. If you have chosen to make your whole life political, that does not mean you are subject to totalitarianism. Totalitarianism is when the government is forcing itself into your personal life. That's the difference. You've got it mixed up. If I decide I want to make every second of my day a political action, then I am not the subject of totalitarianism. It's a choice. It's a freedom. And it's completely different from the government forcing a certain type of lifestyle upon me. Being forced to do something, like hire black employees, is completely different from having the freedom to not do something, like not associate with black people. These are both the practice of identity politics. One of them prescribes something for you to do, and the other one removes an obligation.
And so it is by definition totalitarian, and James was not really very well versed in why this was. And I wasn't especially nice to him in the Facebook group where he'd posted this, going, oh, I can't believe anyone actually believes this. Because honestly, he was just there to confirm his own biases. And then he made this video that I was reading the comments on it, and people were like, wow, you just sound like you're full of salt. Because there's quite a long thread, and he just got BTFO'd repeatedly. Because the alt-right really need to start reading books, right? Because he confused repeatedly the terms authority and authoritarianism, as if all authority is authoritarianism, in the same way that they repeatedly confuse the term individual with individualism.
It's completely ridiculous, the idea that authority and authoritarianism is the exact same concept.
No, and I posted the definitions. Authority.
You can have authority in a pluralistic society. You can have authority in a society.
Well, this is the purpose of basically, and I don't have to say it, but he literally hasn't read Locke. I mean, that's literally what Locke's talking about is the justification of authority without being tyrannical. And it's hilarious that this is actually the meme is coming to life. But the point is, authoritarianism is the exercise of authority without regard to personal freedom, and that's obviously what social justice and any other identity politics does.
So again, at this point, he's just assuming that identity politics are going to be carried out using authoritarianism. Social justice warriors don't necessarily need authoritarianism, it's just the tool that they happen to use the most, because their ideas are extremely unpopular, and they can only survive with authoritarianism. But the idea that a Middle Easterner should be able to live next to another Middle Easterner and not be called racist, that's not an unpopular idea, and it doesn't require any authoritarianism to allow that to take place. The difference between social justice warriors and the right-wing identitarians is that identitarians are recognizing natural patterns, and they are facilitating those patterns to take place, whereas the social justice warriors are noticing natural patterns, calling them unfair, and then legislating to prevent them from happening. A neighborhood being filled up of a certain race is much more natural than transgenderism. It simply is. Social justice warriors are trying to make us not be disturbed by transgenderism or pedophilia, whereas right-wing identitarians are just saying that we should be allowed to form white communities, that we should have freedom of association. One of these is forcing you to behave in a certain way, and the other one is giving you the freedom to behave in a certain way.
And he wasn't able to differentiate legitimate justified authority, as in the consent of the governed, with authoritarianism without the consent of the governed. Tyranny, basically. And so I just wanted to explain to him that basically, James, what it is when you're collectivizing yourselves under an attribute, which is obviously in contradiction to an individualistic society where everyone enjoys the same protections. When you're collectivizing one group based on these group characteristics, you are imbuing whoever controls this group with absolute power over you, because there is no time where you can ever step outside of this group, because it's based on an immutable characteristic, such as your race or your gender or whatever.
You're making a lot of assertions and drawing a lot of connections, but you're not actually substantiating anything you're saying here. You have to actually explain why these things are true. And no, read Locke isn't a valid response to this.
And so what you're saying is you want someone to have a power over you that you can never escape, and anything that happens to one, any rule that created anything that's decided that happens to one of this group happens to all of this group, whether you like it or not. So basically, all this is a power fantasy where you're in charge.
Yeah,
and that's pretty damn ignorant, because I mean, like,
this psychoanalysis is pretty Jewish, dude.
Rawls's veil of ignorance is a very relevant thing here, and for anyone who doesn't know what that is, it's imagine if you got to choose. Imagine you got to choose where you were born, but you didn't know what it was going to be like. So you're behind this veil of ignorance. You know, what kind of system would you want to be born into? Because you don't know whether you're going to be born as the lowest serf or the highest lord, and so you would choose the most fair society. And so far, what we've discovered is individualism. It makes the most fair societies. So that's naturally what you have to choose. And
Sargon takes the veil of ignorance as resulting in liberalism as a foregone conclusion, which it definitely is not. The veil of ignorance simply makes you think about specific ideologies from a broader perspective. It doesn't mean you're going to be a liberal. You can still arrive at the conclusion that you want to be a communist or a fascist or a libertarian. All it does is give you a different perspective on those ideologies. So for example, if we take Rawls's veil of ignorance, if I was going to risk being reincarnated, then I would want to create a society where if I was born, I would be born into a place where my IQ had a very good chance of actually being within the average. If two African parents have a child in London, the chance of that child having an IQ that's around average is very, very low, because Africans on average have a lower IQ. Whereas if we had ethno-states, if you were reincarnated into an African child, you would want it to be in an African ethno-state, so that you were more similar to the people around you and you had a fighting chance of actually making something of yourself. This idea you have that you want to create an individualistic, multicultural society where an African kid can be born into a place where his IQ is going to be vastly under everyone else's is ridiculous, because eventually these people are just going to start recognizing with the racial characteristics, and you're going to end up with identity politics anyway. The only way to avoid severe identity politics and infighting is to have one very large, very homogeneous identity. People have innate characteristics that they cannot get rid of. So the only way to prevent these people from falling back into those identities is to keep them separated from each other. A homogeneous society, by definition, starts everyone off on equal footing. And the most simple, easy to access heuristic for homogeneity is race. If everyone is very similar to each other, everyone is given the same tools to begin with, and then everything that arises from that is meritocratic. But trying to convince 70 IQ Africans in the heart of London that the reason they're failing is because they're not working hard enough isn't going to work. They're going to know that the people around them have some innate advantage that they do not have.
And ultimately, he doesn't understand that all of these things operate under the same principles. Like, Islamism is, within it, contains Muslim identitarianism.
Liberalistism contains within it liberalist identitarianism. See how fucking stupid that sounds? It's obvious. Everyone is partaking in identity politics, including you. Politics is pretty much synonymous with identity politics. When you're going into politics, you are representing a certain set of ideas that you identify with, an identity. That's the entire point. And as you just admitted, Islam contains within it a form of identity politics. So you're not restricting this to just innate things. You're allowing ideas to be part of identity politics.
And you hear this all the time. They'll say, oh, the Muslims this, the non-Muslims that, the kafir. You know, they even have their own terms for it.
Collectivist this, social justice warrior that. You have the terms that you like to throw around as well, buddy.
There is no getting around the fact that identity politics, including Islamism, is inherently totalitarian by definition and by method of action.
You still aren't making any arguments towards why these things are inherently totalitarian. You're just asserting that they are over and over again. If this is the way things are going to go, then you have to let the feminists say that feminism is about equality by definition. This is the same tier of argument you are making.
And he has this fantasy in his head that he'll have the non-totalitarian, non-tyrannical version of identity politics.
It's not possible when you structure it from a class structure. It's not possible for it to not to be totalitarian.
Thank you again for another pointless fucking assertion. Every time this dude says something, Sargon just says exactly. I'm serious, go back and rewind the video and watch every single time that dude talks. All Sargon says is exactly and then keeps going on with his thing. It's like this dude is here just to agree and reinforce what Sargon is already thinking.
Exactly.
It is a dynamic of oppress and oppressor. So it must be that you must suppress and oppress those that would otherwise oppress you.
The entire point of the ethno-states are to give people the room so that no one is oppressing anyone just by existing. The existence of white people oppresses black people in intellectual matters. The existence of black people oppresses people in the 100-meter sprint. Okay? Some people are better at things. Unless we give everyone their own playpen, there's going to be massive amounts of inequality, and white people are the ones who are on top, so we're the ones that are always going to get blamed. So he goes through a couple minutes of circle jerking now, reasserting things he's already asserted, and a quick lecture about how using the weapons of your enemy makes you just as bad as your enemy, which it obviously fucking doesn't. Picking up your enemy's gun to shoot your enemy who is trying to rape you doesn't make you as bad as the enemy. If the enemy's trying to kill your children and you grab the gun out of his hands and shoot him in the face, you're not as bad as the enemy, okay? It's a retarded line of argumentation to make. So that's the end of that video. Sargon really needs to start taking the criticisms of people from the right more seriously and actually engage with them. His entire philosophy is so one-dimensional. It's as if he read Locke and then Rawls and they just stopped there and has stagnated ever since. His entire philosophy is just a way to dodge responsibility to society. He's just an atomized individual and eventually society is going to overtake him and his kind are just going to disappear, whether it be from us instituting what we want or from the Islamists instituting what they want. The only way forward from here is identitarianism, whether Sargon likes it or not. It's a natural pattern, and nature always takes the path of least resistance. People need to stop taking Sargon seriously until he finally engages with people on the right. It is not sufficient to just keep comparing us to social justice warriors. We are fundamentally different things that come from fundamentally different places. We might use some of the same tools and principles sometimes, but that's it. That's where the similarities end. Sargon knows this, and that's why he refuses to debate anyone from this sphere. He knows that the same arguments that worked against social justice warriors will not work against us, because he knows that we are not the same thing. And so instead he parades around, announcing to everyone that he's done with the alt-right, that there's no convincing them, and that he's going to focus on the left because the left is reasonable. Because criticizing a blue-haired, problem-glasses feminist is going to be a lot more constructive than talking with someone on the identitarian right. Sargon's viewers are going to want more content, and unless he's willing to debate people on the right, his channel's probably going to begin to die. So I look forward to being there to catch all the people who want something a bit more in depth than what Sargon can provide. So like, share and subscribe, and do what you can in your own life to ensure the survival of your people.